Hello. It has been a while. I've been a bit busy in real life, traveling to a different place, but now I have got some time, so I'm going to be making some more review videos and, of course, reviews on the website. So starting off with the BZ-74-1. I am late on this, of course. The event is almost going to end, but considering how much this tank costs, it's unlikely that very many people have gotten it. But yeah, basically how you get this tank is from this luxury lounge event, and you need these cards, legendary cards, to be able to get the BZ-74-1, and you needed a crazy amount of them in these crates. Well, not these crates, gambling for them in these crates, and by spending your currency. Basically extremely expensive and not worth it. The tank overall is just fairly average, nothing super special or anything like that. But it is a tier 9 Chinese heavy tank, featuring some fairly similar traits to the Object 452K and WZ-111-14. So this is a tank with good speed, quite mediocre armor. It's definitely below average, and quite a decent gun with 460 alpha and good DPM, but fairly unimpressive accuracy stats and penetration. But I'll get right into the review, as I have just done one on my website, which you can of course go check if you don't want this commentary while checking out this tank. But firstly, going over its armor. This is it against tier 9 level of heavy tank penetration, which is 246mm of AP. You can see that the hull is fairly weak, except on the edges, which do go up to quite strong. And then of course also the turret. You can see that you can't penetrate through the turret with standard ammo when it is facing towards you, except on these small narrow bars next to the gun, and of course on that cupola. Again, remember, this tank is using enhanced armor, so of course there is that to consider. Its armor is a bit stronger due to equipment. When you turn the turret, of course, it does become quite weak, just because the turret is slightly tapered towards the gun, so the angling does get worse when you turn the turret, and you can see that it goes right through with standard ammo. Something else you can notice is that the side armor, while it does show up as being red, it's only 67mm thick, so it is very weak, and if you shoot the tracks, it will go in. Next, if you switch to premium ammo, heat, you can see that the armor gets much worse on the turret, and that's because the armor on the turret is just barely over the amount that you have on standard ammo in tiers 9 and 10. Switching to heat will immediately allow you to penetrate right through the turret, even when it is angled away. As you can see sort of here on that far turret cheek, it is still weak and close to being penetrable. But you can see basically the tank has no armor, absolutely none, when you do use premium ammo. Of course it's got the same weak points as usual, and its lower plate is notably very weak, allowing even lower penetration, i.e. free HESH, to penetrate through. Here's a typo, 767. It's 67mm side armor, which does mean that tanks will be able to penetrate right through the sides. With HE, higher penetration HE, of course, such as tanks which have 80-90mm, and of course on the rear as well, where it is only 47, most tanks can HE through that. So you do have to watch out for HE a little bit. I'll get into enhanced armor in a moment when I go over the equipment, but it is worth using. So when you do use gun depression, the turret armor against 246 AP, you can see here, it is still of course very red, but against premium ammo, 320 heat, you can see it is fully penetrable, even when you use your maximum gun depression, and that's because the turret cheeks are only up to 285mm thick when you do use full gun depression. And of course the upper plate only between 250 and 280. so standard ammo will bounce off, unlike on flat ground, but still premium ammo does go right through. Next, moving to the gun, this tank has a 130mm, similar to quite a few tier 9 tanks now, doing 460 damage on APCR, 390 on heat and 580 on HE. That HE is 20 damage below what is normal for such a gun. Its DPM is very nice at 2359 with a 11.7 second reload, which I believe is the fastest reloading 460 alpha heavy tank in tier 9, with well, good DPM for such a good level of alpha damage. Penetration is quite low, in fact the lowest of a tier 9 heavy tank, due to having fairly low base penetration of 242mm. However, that base penetration is also APCR, which has worse normalization than AP. Of course, its heat is 305, which is also the lowest in tier 9, and unlike a BZ-176, which is likely to use vents due to its high alpha damage, sorry, not vents, calibrated shells due to its high alpha damage, this tank uses, well, it gains benefit from gunhammer, and also it has that same low penetration. So it's sort of 50-50 whether you use gunhammer or calibrated shells, but both are fairly good on this tank. HE completely normal, 65. Its aim time is 3.2/3.4. That is very good aim time for a 460 alpha gun, especially in tier 9, where a lot of the tier 9 tanks with such a level of alpha have quite slow base aim time. This has a very good 1.9 seconds, and you definitely do feel that in battle. And that is despite its fairly average gun handling and mediocre dispersion. Gun depression is 7 degrees, that's pretty decent. This tank sits on a modified pattern hull, so I believe it is slightly shorter than the other patterns, but again, a pattern is quite a large hull, so you do have to watch out for that. But 7 degrees, perfectly decent and fine for this tank. Due to having APCR as standard ammo, it does have very good 1190 shell velocity, which I believe is the best in tier 9 for a heavy tank, but I'm not 100% sure on that. It's definitely up there among the best. But overall, this gun, pretty good, pretty decent. What it loses in its penetration and its accuracy, it makes up in its better DPM, damage combination, and its very fast aim time, so it trades out a bit to gain a bit. Mobility 45 forwards are very good, the highest in tier 9 if you don't consider tanks which run gear oil, and a reverse speed of 15. That is a typo, it is 15, it is not 12. Again, fairly normal reverse speed. Traverse speed is 43.5 on hard terrain, with a very good 16.7 acceleration rate on hard terrain. But on medium terrain, it's a lot less impressive at 33.5 degrees of traverse and 12.8 horsepower per ton. So basically what this means, how the tank feels is on hard terrain, it feels very agile, very mobile. It can reach its top speed a lot more reliably than on medium terrain. On medium terrain, it feels closer to a normal heavy tank, but slightly better. It doesn't really feel as fast as it should be, considering you're lacking armor and this tank has such a high top speed. You'd expect it to be going a little bit faster on medium terrain in terms of its acceleration and its traverse speed. And the reason for this is because its terrain resistance difference is 1 to 1.3, which does mean you do notice that terrain resistance difference. But one thing to not pass over is the 91-ton weight of this tank, which you definitely don't realize in battle. I didn't realize this tank weighed so much until I checked its stats, because it has such a strong horsepower engine. 91 tons is a lot, and you can ram a ton of vehicles with such a heavy weight. But moving to equipment. So, gun rammer, as I said, due to this tank having good DPM for 460 alpha and low penetration for a heavy tank, calibrated shells does work very well on this tank. It will give you some very nice premium penetration, especially on that heat, and of course with standard APCR, doesn't give as much benefit, but it does still make a difference. So definitely consider calibrated shells if you do notice that poor penetration in battle. However, for me personally, I still like the DPM and like to use gun rammer. A lot of the situations in this tank, you won't be sort of sitting hull down playing a brawling, well, not brawling, a holding position against tanks where you won't have enough penetration to go through. And that is because this tank doesn't have enough armor to deal with such situations in tiers 9 through 10. But when facing tier 8s for such a situation, you have more than enough penetration. So for a hull down situation, you don't really need calibrated shells, just because in tier 9 through 10, you'll get buttered through the turret. In tier 8, you don't need the penetration. But of course, this is up to you. Try it out in battle and choose the one which fits you better. Improved optics, because this is a heavy tank, you don't need the camo. Engine accelerator, just to be able to reach your top speed a bit better, especially for medium terrain where you do notice that this tank's mobility isn't super impressive considering its very high top speed. Enhanced armor is mandatory on this tank. This is probably the most important equipment piece for this vehicle, and don't use improved assembly, you'd be absolutely insane. Enhanced armor is so important on this vehicle because this tank's armor is balanced around the penetration levels that you get in tiers 8, 9 and 10. So starting off with the tanks you will face the most often, tier 9 and tier 10 heavy tanks. So you can see that hull is completely penetrable, there's really no saving that. However, the turret, you can see it is just slightly red, very slightly. Its effectiveness is roughly 250 to 252 millimeters against AP. However, of course, notice the penetration that we're facing, 252 from an IS-4. If you do use enhanced armor, you can see the difference it makes to the turret. It just barely pushes it over the level where the tank like the IS-4 won't be able to go through, and you can see here, despite it still being very slightly green, most of the time you aren't going to be penetrating through, just due to it having increased to roughly 258 millimeters of thickness compared to the previous 252. And it does just make that small amount of difference where the enemy now just completely can't go through your turret front unless they have got calibrated shells or just higher penetration in general. So that's for tier 9 and 10 heavy tanks. Of course, it's not going to make a difference against heat, but it will make a big difference against standard ammo. Against tier 8s, if you use enhanced armor, it will make a difference on the hull compared to sort of general levels of penetration between sort of the 215 to 225 level of penetration. Here it is 218 from a T32, but you can see how enhanced armor makes a difference on the hull. Of course, if you switch to premium ammo, the hull won't be savable too much, and you can see that you go through the turret fairly easily. Just like with tier 10 tanks though, if you use enhanced armor, it just barely pushes it over the level where you need it to be, and that will allow you to bounce tier 8 premium ammo off the turret cheeks now. So enhanced armor is very important just because the turret armor of this tank is sort of balanced right on the edge of tier 8 premium ammo and tier 9 and 10 standard ammo. So if you enhance that and improve it, it will just push it over and make it basically bounce a lot more reliably. Next, gun lane drive. Because this tank has very good shell velocity, you don't need supercharger, and because this tank has very good aim time, it would be good to sort of maximize on that aspect, especially when this tank's dispersion and gun handling aren't so impressive. And due to that, you wouldn't really be using vertical stabilizer on this tank, it would be better to use a refined gun. Another reason not to drop enhanced gunning drive, because you won't have the better aim time from the stabilizer. And of course, moving to stabilizer or refined gun, As much as I love using vertical stabilizer, on this tank it is very noticeable that refined gun is the better choice, just because you get aimed in very quickly, but then your dispersion isn't good enough for quite a few situations. You're sitting there with a fully aimed shot, but you aren't quite accurate enough, and you will miss a few shots, which is why I'd say go with refined gun. Take the better accuracy. This tank already has great aim time, so it won't cause too many issues for your on-move dispersion or your aim time. Of course, this tank, very normal in the consumable and provision department. And that's it, moving to the gameplay. So I've got two battles in the BZ-74-1. Both of them are top tier games. I did have quite a few against tier 10s. Of course I had to try out in such a situation. And I had a few good ones in tier 10 as well. However, I don't feel they show the necessary gameplay of this tank very well, so that's why I'm not showing them in today's video. In this battle, you can see I started on a slight downhill slope, and my mobility, good top speed, allowing me to get up to base C very quickly for a heavy tank. And of course I'm also staying on that road, which is hard terrain. But there you can see sort of the good mobility of this tank coming into play, allowing me to get to this base very quickly. Unfortunately, there's no enemies on base D to sort of contest that, so not too much benefit came from getting C that quickly, but oh well. I'm going to push down towards base D. I'm going to not capture it, because we're already down a tank, and I can just flank this T-30 and get in a few good shots. However, there is a surprise lurver there, so I shoot the lurver instead, and now pull back. So now I've basically used my mobility for the battle. I'm not going to be moving around too much. I'm just going to hold this position here and use this tank's good alpha damage and DPM to put in a few shots in that lurver and whatever other tanks appear on this side. One of them being that AMX-50. There you could see this tank's very good aim time, and in this battle I'm using refined gun. Important to point out, because in the next battle I'm not using refined gun. But you could see the good aim time there, able to put in a shot on that AMX-50-120, which most other tanks with 460 alpha wouldn't be able to put in that shot, just due to having quite mediocre base aim time. BZ-74 on the other hand, very good aim time considering it's 460 alpha, which is something very nice to have on this vehicle. It's definitely noticeable. So now, I was in a situation where I was really in a sort of 1v3. Can't really push out because the Vipera is over there, but luckily I do manage to shut down that lurver. Now I'm just going to push forward and get a snapshot onto this AMX-50-120. Very nice shell velocity allowing me to do that there, and of course the better dispersion of refined gun letting me snap in a shot there. However, you'll see that's not only because of refined gun, as it happens a few times in the next battle where I'm using vertical stabilizer. So there I put in a blind shot towards the Vipera just because I know my penetration can't go through the front of the Vipera in case he is facing towards me. But now I'm going to try and push towards this Iraq 105, but seeing the Vipera out in the open I do decide to go for a shot on him. Again, you can see the good aim time there. I did have to stop and aim, but you can see it did get aimed in quite fast compared to other 460 alpha tanks. And of course, if you play tier 9 heavies a lot, you'd know about that on the E75, BZ-68, Object 452, WZ-111, 1-4. Unfortunately, Object 84 does finish me off there. I don't get a high roll, but luckily this Iraq 105 does a little carry at the end of the game, finishes off the Vipera, and then manages to kill this Object 84. So we do win in the end. So that battle didn't block much damage, one shot from the lurver when I was side scraping, and then none else. Doing 3,700 in total in damage, first class mastery, and getting 77,000 credits without a credit booster. And that is just because I don't really have many on this account. It's a brand new press account. But next battle is on mines, of course, top tier again, like I said. In this battle though, I'm going to show sort of the hull down gameplay which you can manage to have in this tank. So in my review on the website I do say there are sort of two kinds of gameplay you can try with this tank. One is flanking, well not flanking, it's using the mobility and the gun instead of the armor, which is what this tank sort of has to do in tier 9 and 10 where its armor is just not good. You have to focus on trying to use that speed and the gun more than trying to use the armor. However, when you are top tier, like in this battle against tier 8s, you can use the armor. As I showed earlier, the armor against tier 8s is actually pretty decent. You can bounce on the hull on flat ground against, well, most tanks in tier 8. And of course, when you're using full gun depression, you can even bounce premium ammo from most heavy tanks. So in this situation, I'm sort of the only heavy tank that is pushing this mid-ridge, with the IS-3 not really pushing or putting pressure on me. Again, remember this battle I am using vertical stabilizer and not refined gun. So now I'm going to try push for the IS-3 as I didn't quite have enough gun depression there. You can see that buffed IS-3 upper plate against this tank's 242 APCR does give it a few issues, so I did load premium ammo there, but it went into the lower plate so it didn't really matter that much. So this Destiny does get a bit lucky. I'm not sure where he hits, I believe it was the turret ring, but with his penetration he really shouldn't have been able to go through the front of the turret unless he was running calibrated shells, which of course could be the case. But the penetration mark on my turret was from APCR, which the Destiny does not have, so really not too sure where he was penetrating me. So now I'm not really wanting to push up too much as there is a sniping Waffenträger which you can see just missed by hitting the ridge there, and of course both the IS-3 and the E50 are still just sitting there. And I don't really know where the Scorpion is, but he just went unspotted on the side, so I really should have been paying a bit more attention. Here you can see that aim time of the tank. Pretty decent. May have not seemed that good, but compared to other tanks with 460 alpha in tier 9, it is actually very good. So now I'm going to push this IS-3, but I make a bit of a bad play shooting his tracks, knowing I had APCR, which doesn't have great normalization and would have trouble going through at that angle. Or I just got unlucky, who knows. But to guarantee the penetration I do use heat there, just because I don't want to risk it with this tank's lower 242 APCR. So here I get a shot into the back of the T-28 Defender, but I don't use HE because I can't fully see his rear. And you might be wondering why I'm not using HE on the Waffenträger, and that is just because I don't know if he's using Spalliner or not. And with this tank's lower HE damage compared to other 460 guns, I'm kind of not wanting to risk it. However, against this Scorpion, he does not have Spalliner, so I'm definitely going to utilize that HE. Probably should be pushing this guy because I have quite a few hit points. Nice snapshot there. 544 damage. It is a slight low roll, but again, with this tank's lower HE damage, you will notice that a bit. So now that this E75 is pushing around the front of the Scorpion, I'm going to go around the side and get another snapshot in. Now it just leaves the Waffenträger as the last enemy, and you'll see here as I'm going up this hill on medium terrain, The tank's mobility really doesn't seem as good as it should be, considering its armor is fairly weak and it has a high top speed. It seems like Wargaming was going for a more heavium type tank, but it doesn't really seem to be moving like one on medium terrain. And that's not to say this tank's mobility is bad, it's just it doesn't seem quite as good as it should be. You can see I'm just barely able to make those corners there because of the worse terrain resistance and traverse speed it has on medium terrain. So again, try to stick to hard terrain, stay on roads, stay on paths, stay on concrete areas, just because it makes a huge difference to the mobility. It does feel night and day when you're travelling on hard terrain, a map like New Bay, compared to medium terrain, a map like Mines, for example. But in that battle, I did block a few more shots, of course using the turret and hull armor on that ridge and combining it with the gun depression. 4,700 damage as well with an ace tanker, which does give me a much higher credit, return than the previous battle. But yeah, this tank BZ-74-1. It's overall an okay tank. It's nothing too special really. It's sort of similar in its traits to the Object 452K and the WZ-111-1-4, but it has just a few different sort of aspects. Instead of a strong turret, it's got a weaker turret, but it does have better mobility than the Object 452K, and it has got very good aim time compared to those other two tanks. Overall, it's an average tank. It's nothing too special, but it is, I guess, slightly different from the regular heavy tank in Tier 9. But definitely nothing to lose your mind over. If it does come back in the store, it's not worth all that much. Just wait for it to come for gold. Don't know why that has turned on. But yeah, that is the BZ-74-1. I'll probably try to do the MBTB next because that review is long overdue. But yeah, thanks for watching.